The movie opens with John and Jane Smith sitting through couples therapy. They both claim to be an 8 on the happy scale, but the room is filled with passive-aggressive tension. They try to avoid any questions about their love life, so the therapist asks about how they first met. It was 5 or 6 years ago in Colombia, when the police were hunting for a lone American traveler suspected of a crime. John was at the bar when he saw Jane run and harassed by cops, and he decided to help her by claiming they are together. They both began spending time with each other and enjoyed a night of really dirty dancing. The next morning, Jane thought it was just a one-night stand, but to her surprise, John returned to her with breakfast. They then attended a fair together where John began to show off his shooting skills and Jane, not to be shown up, displayed some expert shooting, but claims it to be beginner's luck. Things escalated quickly and the two began dating. John tells his friend Eddie about Jane's career in IT, having her own firm and being very successful. Eddie thinks he is taking things too fast, but John explains that he is in love. Meanwhile, Jane knows him as being a very successful contractor in the construction industry, and while her friend Jasmine is very skeptical, John and Jane have already planned to get married. 6 years later, John and Jane are married with a beautiful home in the suburbs. The two get along, but things are very weird and competitive, shown when the two try leaving for work together. That night, John drives in getting death stares from Jane. He puts on his ring and checks a lipstick mark on his collar before heading inside, where they both smile and greet each other. Secretly, they both display some high-level skills, John easily making a hoop without looking and Jane skillfully balancing on a chair but stopping when John walks in. That night, John sees Jane get a call, then getting dressed afterwards. She explains that she got a call about a crash server downtown and leaves, with John leaving soon after. Jane gets to a hotel where she is led to a room by armed men. Inside, a man steps out smiling. Jane removes her coat to reveal a dominatrix outfit, asking the man if he is ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, John gets to a bar and stumbles drunkenly into a back room looking for the bathroom. There, some men are playing poker with one chair empty. They chase John out of the room until he flashes a coil of cash and they realize that he is drunk out of his mind. They explain that their friend will soon return, but invite John to join them for the game where they laugh and have fun. The missing friend then returns, and immediately John shoots him dead before killing everyone in the room easily. Meanwhile, Jane has tied the man up and he thinks he is in for a good time, but Jane suddenly snaps his neck, killing him. She gets dressed before his guards realize what is happening, then escapes using a grapple hidden in her handbag, floating to the ground and getting into a cab. She gets home and almost gets caught by John but is able to get changed. The next day, John goes to his tool shed where he has a secret safe house underground loaded with weapons and cash. After he leaves, Jane jumps out of bed and reveals her own secret stash hidden inside the oven and removes a knife and gun. John gets to his construction company, which is a front for a contract killing firm, where Eddie is his partner. John checks in with his employers and gets a contract to take out a prisoner named the Tank before he can transfer prisons. Jane gets to her company downtown, where an entire floor is dedicated to her contract killing firm. She learns about the contract on Tank's head and her employer urges her to get to him ahead of their competition. Then she is briefed on the details by Jasmine. Jane gets to the location, having set up sensors and mines along the road. She waits for the target to get close. She then spots a car racing through the desert blasting music, which knocks over one of her sensors, causing the mines to activate. It turns out to be John pulling up to take care of the target. He jumps out and pulls a rocket launcher out of his car, and Jane, seeing the weapon, grabs her rifle and shoots him. John recovers and grabs his launcher, firing at his attacker. The mines go off prematurely and the target manages to escape. John pulls the bullet out of his vest and grabs a burnt computer from the explosion and sees the person riding away on a bike. Later, John goes to talk with Eddie, telling him about the pro girl he met on the hit who shot him. Meanwhile, Jane returns to her office furious, demanding to know who the man was. Her employer urges her to find her attacker and take him out, and she orders her girls to get working on finding him. John takes the burnt laptop to a tech who is able to pull some details and get a billing address, a location he recognizes. He heads over to the building, staking out the place. He checks the name on the address, and is shocked to see his wife's name there. Upstairs, Jane is going over the footage of the man, when she spots something. As the man is peeing, he shakes his leg, something only one man she knows does. John races home but cautiously enters the driveway. He sneaks around and enters the house but sees no sign of Jane, who suddenly appears out of nowhere. They both begin silently sizing each other up before heading to the dinner table. John hides away a dinner knife in his jacket, not sure what to expect. Jane grabs a knife to carve the pot roast, but John decides to conveniently help her with it and takes over. John is nervous as hell but tries to keep his cool. He purposely drops a wine bottle which she catches but drops right after. They both leave claiming to grab cleaning items, but John grabs his gun and begins calling for Jane only to see her speed off in the car. He begins running through the neighbors' yards to cut her off, and accidentally fires his weapon which almost hits her. He tries to explain but Jane hits him with her car and he lands on the top. Jane then bails from the car before it runs into bushes. John goes to see Eddie, shocked about the entire revelation. Eddie thinks Jane knew all along and was planted in his life. Jane is talking with Jasmine at her office about what to do. Jasmine concludes that Jane doesn't really love him and once they kill John she will be okay. The next day, Jane and her team pull up to the house and begin to sweep the place, ripping up stuff, and Jane tries to pretend she doesn't care about them going through her stuff. John turns up after, using his neighbor as an unknowing body shield and witness in case he encounters Jane. He heads to his secret room and sees that she has raided all his weapons and cash. Jane and her girls are scanning the city for John, only to get a notification that he has breached their building. She gives the orders and they begin to hurriedly wipe their systems and fire grapples across to another building to escape. John rushes in to see Jane grapple across and they shout insults at each other before leaving. John is back at Eddie going through some burnt files from the office and finds a hint to where Jane is based. He goes over to the building which is under construction. He enters the elevator which suddenly stops and he hears Jane talking to him. She tells him to get out of town or she will drop the elevator with him inside. John calls her bluff which catches her off guard, but one of her girls blows the elevator, which crashes into the ground. Jane steps out of a van nearby and goes to check, concerned. Turns out, John is in another elevator, feeling very disappointed that his wife would try to kill him. Later, Jane is at dinner with tears running down her face, but John turns up and takes a seat. They both secretly point guns at each other while they try to figure out what's going on. John invites her to dance and they begin disarming each other. They try to figure out if their marriage was all a lie and who was the cover. Jane leaves and heads upstairs and causes an explosion, using the confusion to make her escape. Outside, John hears a ticking in his jacket and removes it in time before it explodes. He steals a car and they both race back home. He calls her and confesses to her that he loved her the first time he saw her, but Jane is unable to trust him, telling him that he was only a mark and he was just business. They both get home and Jane rams his car before racing in before him. John sneaks through his neighbor's house and sees Jane come checking with a rifle in her hand. John is able to break into the house through a window, and grabs a gun he had hidden in the house and go looking for Jane but is met by shotgun blasts. The two begin to have a shootout inside the house, tearing up everything in sight. John is pinned down so he pulls the gas lines and causes a massive explosion. Once Jane is disarmed, the two begin to duke it out, throwing each other around the house brutally, with John giving her that equality treatment. They end in a standoff, but John lowers his gun, as he cannot shoot her. In that moment, they realize that they are both madly in love with each other, then engage in demonetizing activities as brutal as the fight before. That night, Eddie is at home when he gets a notification of a $400,000 bounty on both John and Jane's heads. In the morning, John and Jane try to make breakfast in the torn-up kitchen, all smiling and finally happy with each other. Outside, a postal truck pulls up, but the man has come to deliver bullets. Smoke grenades are thrown into the house and lasers begin scanning for them. They rush to the basement and grab their weapons as they hear footsteps upstairs. A bomb is dropped in the basement, and the couple barely manage to escape before the entire house is blown to shreds. They steal their neighbor's car and hit the road where they're being trailed by hitmen. Jane takes over the wheels and John does the shooting. He confesses to her that he was married once before and Jane almost collects that bounty on his head. The men try shooting and boarding the car but the couple manage to stay ahead, until Jane pulls off driving skills to get rid of the remaining cars. They go to see Eddie who warns them that both their companies are after their heads and unless they can find their employers a bigger target, they are toast. Jane then gets info about the tank and where he is being held, so the two decide to grab him and hand him over to get the heat off them. Jane is on surveillance, while John breaks in. He breaks into the room and kills all the men before grabbing the tank from his cell and bringing him back to the van. They take the tank back to a motel and begin to interrogate him about why their employers are after them. He reveals that their employers found out about their marriage and used him as bait hoping that they would kill each other. He reveals that he has a tracker on him, and just then the motel is surrounded by helicopters and armed agents. They burst into the room to find only the tank there. Jane and John are hiding in the sewers and she wants to make a run for it, but John tells her that they need to put an end to this once and for all. They run over to a nearby mall and are able to break in. Meanwhile, armed men are scanning the entire area looking for them and spot the broken door. Meanwhile, Jane and John manage to change off into some suits and begin taking out the armed men silently. Jane grabs a knife cart and begins throwing knives, killing out the first team. They come under heavy gunfire as men begin surrounding them. Jane gets shot and John rushes over and grabs her, but they are hit with rounds until they fall inside a small hut. They reveal body armor and look outside to see them being surrounded. They arm themselves and prepare to go out together in a blaze of glory. They burst out, unloading their mags and dodging rocket fire. Luckily these guys aren't trained to aim at their heads, and after a brutal fight, they wipe out all the men. After, the couple are back in therapy, but this time, their marriage is much stronger and are proud to announce that their love life is back. Remember to turn on notifications, so you can watch more movie recaps like this. Thanks for watching.